Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар, Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптю посорбати довбані щі, та трохи в ущах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 112 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine here on day 112. We have had some pretty good news today. We have heard that the Ukrainian forces near Kherson have continued to push the Russians back inch by inch, and now on the western side of the city, they are now closer than they've ever been since the war started. So we'll, of course, touch back on that later. It is, of course, incredible news to hear, but by and large, the front line has remained stable. And we're also starting to notice that the Russians are sort of ramping up their war on food and food production in Ukraine in a way, as we're starting to see more and more evidence that they are specifically targeting food sources and food resources and trying to ensure that there are less of them. We'll, of course, cover both of those things in tonight's news, but I want to make sure to let everyone know that we are running a limited edition merch run right now. That's right, we do have limited edition merch. We have 3 different types, actually. We have a coffee mug that says the Tears of Russian Bots on it. We also have a Moscow Mike t-shirt and hoodie, and we also have, let me actually just show them to y'all real quick, enforcerstore.com, and we'll pop up on here, which is the store you go to. The link is in the description below. And then here on the store, we can see the Moscow Mike shirt, the Professor Mortar shirt, and we can also see the Tears of Russian Bots mug right here. So I hope y'all get some. Of course, it does support the channel, and it gives you something pretty cool to look at when you're watching these streams. I actually know of a couple of viewers who say that they drink, like, whatever, you know, out of these mugs in the middle of the stream, which honestly is really cool to me. So I hope y'all check them out, and I hope y'all do like them. Of course, we put a little flame here, featured products, because they're fire. But anyways, with that, let's get to the schedule. Starting off, we'll actually be starting off in Kyiv today, as we have a couple of bits of news that are of importance, I guess you could say, on the international scale, and also just something neat to see in the city. Moving on from there, we'll then be moving into the Chernihiv area, and of course covering the news there as well. We have heard some interesting things from the students that actually have gone to school at Chernihiv and are graduating. We'll then be moving into Russia, into the Kursk area, and we're going to be going over a little bit of news there, and then we'll be going into the location unknowns and covering every single one of them. There's actually a pretty decent amount today, around 13, and after we cover that, we're then going to move towards the Poltava area, which is a huge twist from normal nights. But before we do that, we're of course going to take a quick pause and answer 3 questions from the chat. We'll then cover the news in Poltava, the news in Kharkiv, and also the northern Donbass news. Once we get done covering that news segment, we're then going to move on down into the southern front. But before we do, once again, we're going to take another pause and answer another 3 questions from the chat. Then we'll move on down into the southern front, and we'll cover all of the remainder of the news from the southern front around the world. We do have international news today, and we've also heard of a big meeting with NATO, and we've heard that the more supplies will be sent, and a very interesting kind, but we will touch on that later. And so, after we do that, we'll then go full circle back to Kyiv. We'll listen to the speech from President Zelensky, and then after that, we'll go into a question segment for the rest of the streams, answer everyone's super chats, and then answer as many live chats as we can. And so, with that, we're going to start off in Kyiv today, where we can actually see that the Albanian and Montenegro prime ministers visited the country of Ukraine today, and we can see that they took pictures beside President Zelensky. We also know that they traveled out, as most, I guess you could say, foreign diplomats do, to the Bucha Hostomel Irpin area, and they, of course, surveyed the damage and destruction, as well as the atrocities that were committed by the Russians in that northern suburb of the city. Moving on to more, I guess you could say, normal news in Kyiv, we've also seen a girl taking a picture of her graduation in Kyiv. You can see her here sitting by the sandbags that were set up when Kyiv was in jeopardy of actually being attacked directly. And as the war's gone on, of course, months have gone by since that was a thing, but we can still see that the remnants of that kind of fear still exists, and we can see this girl triumphantly taking a picture, sitting on these sandbags, as the Russians are nowhere to be seen in this area anymore. And we've generally been getting a lot of pictures like that today. I believe it's kind of around the time that most students in Ukraine are graduating, and we've actually been seeing that a large amount of them are graduating, of course, and they're showing pictures and taking pictures around destroyed Russian equipment, fortifications from when those areas were former battlefields, and it's very interesting to me. And another thing that's interesting is that we've actually gotten a little bit of information from Ukraine saying that there's about an area the size of Arizona in Ukraine right now that needs to be cleared of Russian mines and unexploded ordnances. And so some of these kids maybe wandering around unexploded bombs and shells and whatnot, and they're still, living in danger in a way, but by and large, the Russian army is gone and they are safe, and we can see that a lot of them are celebrating. So, of course, great to see. And then now we're going to move on to the Chernihiv area, where we can actually see more kids graduating from school, which is kind of why I'm believing this may be the time of graduations in Ukraine. And we can see these kids also taking pictures. Well, apparently it was deleted, but we were going to see pictures of some of the students from a school in Chernihiv taking pictures on destroyed Russian tanks, and also inside of them, as some of the turrets, of course, went for the flight record, and so the turret was no longer there, so they would just get inside where the turret basket was, and they would be taking pictures from inside of there. It's really interesting to see that there are still, of course, scars of war, even in the areas of the country that haven't been an active battlefield for 2 to 3 months. And it is really cool to see that these kids have managed to make it through school, even with a massive war going on all around them. And now they are pretty much relishing in Ukraine's successes that occurred earlier in the war today by taking pictures with these tanks when they graduate. And that, this is something that I was thinking about. That's really going to be something for their grandkids and children to look at when they grow up and have kids or grandkids, is that they're going to pull out the photo album, or, obviously there's no longer photo albums. They're going to be showing the pictures that they have saved onto their computer or their phone or whatnot, and they're going to show their kids them standing on destroyed Russian tanks, and their kids are going to be like, wow, my parents survived through the Ukraine war. And it's going to be really cool to them, kind of like it's cool how I know family members that have survived through multiple different kinds of wars, and you look at them a little bit differently. You're like, wow, they went through a lot. And so I don't know if my kids are going to look at me that way, because I was just thinking about that. I don't know if they will, because, of course, I survived through COVID. Everyone, a lot of people survived through COVID. That'll be a story to tell kids. They'll be like, oh, what did you do during the pandemic? I'm going to be like, I stayed at home, because I wasn't going to get sick. And then also, the Ukraine war, and I'll be able to tell them about this. So that'll actually be something I'll be proud to tell my kids about. So with that, we're now going to move out of the Chernihiv area, and we're now going to move on into Russia to the city of Kursk, which surprisingly had a very interesting bit of news today that I saw was not really covered by anybody. There was apparently a massive explosion within the city of Kursk, but no one knows what caused it, and there hasn't been any kind of official report that this is a Ukrainian attack. But here's the video, and you can hear this massive explosion in the background on the film. And you can hear it right there as well. Car alarms are going off. And we could hear it there as well, but it wasn't as strong as the rest. And you can get the idea from these 3 different security cameras and their audio that there was some kind of a massive explosion that occurred within Kursk. It was strong enough in the second clip to actually set off car alarms, but right now we have no idea what caused that explosion and what it hit to, of course, make the car alarms go off, and also to make that raucous noise, which is incredibly loud. So sadly, I can't tell y'all if that was an ammunition depot, some kind of a barrack. I'm not really sure. But we do know that there was a large explosion in Kursk, and we're going to try and see if we can get some more information on it as time goes on. So with that, we're now going to move out of Russia. We're moving through a lot of this with lightning fast pace. There's just kind of minor things to cover right now in the north of the country and also in Russia as well. But with that, we're now going to move into our location unknowns, which we also have a pretty interesting amount of, and we've seen some very interesting things today as well. Starting off, we can actually see that the Ukrainians managed to capture 2 Maxim guns from the Russians, and they're pretty much in their original museum, I guess you could say, fittings. You can see the shield around the Maxim here. That's, of course, kind of common, but you can even see some of the wood crates that they're carrying around the ammo with. And it's just hilarious to me to see that the Ukrainians have been using these as well, but we've actually seen the Russians using these to somewhat higher degrees, especially in their defensive fortifications. They set these things up, and they still work. I can't really dog on them too much. They do have a pretty decent rate of fire, and considering that they're in a static position, which is what these machine guns were practically made for, it's pretty much working to its own strengths, even about over 100 years after these were designed. So it's dated in some ways. Of course, it's not as mobile as a modern machine gun, but at the same time, it's not specifically because of how they're being used. But we can see in this picture a Ukrainian soldier, of course, posing behind one. And in the second picture, we can actually see the two of them that they managed to capture. We can see one right there, and we can actually see that it has some kind of a number that was spray painted onto it. And then we can see the second one here, which I'm assuming he most likely was posed in front of. Really cool, and it's also really neat to see that it has the entire, like, 9 yards intact. It even has the little carriage that they're usually attached to. And what's cool about these, a little fun fact, is that the carriage was actually made to, I guess, pick up the rear end. You can kind of see it right here. It's right in this guy's crotch. It kind of bends in like a big handlebar, and so you grab that, you just tilt it upwards like it's a wheelbarrow, and you run with that thing while it's behind you. It's really cool to me to see how they did that, because it was actually a very efficient way to move this thing around back in World War I, of course, and the times before. But as war went on, having a machine gun that's as heavy as this, that requires you to cart it around like it was a suitcase at the airport, wasn't really efficient anymore, and so that's why we started to see the world delve into, I guess you could say, light machine guns, with the BAR being a great example, and then later on, of course, the MG34, the MG42, the Bren. You started to see light machine guns replace medium machine guns on the battlefield later on into World War II, and then finally medium machine guns like these were completely phased out by the 60s, although we still see them being used in Ukraine up till this day, of course, in very fortified and static positions. But it's great to see that the Ukrainians, of course, are capturing Russian equipment of any kind, and hopefully the Ukrainians have static positions that they can put these into and use them to great effect. And with that, we're going to be moving on to the next bit of news, where we can see a drone and a mortar crew destroying an MTLB on film. This kind of shows us the entire process that they go through. I'm going to make sure it has no copyright music. I don't think it does. It does. Right when I said that. But we could see the drone, of course, flying away to go and find a target for the mortar to fire at. We can now see them firing the mortar, which lets us know that the drone has apparently found a target. And here in a second, we're actually about to see the camera switch to the drone, and we're about to see what this mortar is firing at, which is an MTLB. We can now see them hanging in the next round and firing it. And we can now see those mortar rounds landing downrange. And there is an MTLB in this area. We'll see it here in a second, I believe, if I remember the video correctly. We can see an artillery shell actually punch through that aluminum roof and go inside the shed and then explode. And now we can see the MTLB that was hit by the artillery later on. It appeared to be in a different part, I guess you could say, of that area. It appeared to be more towards a tree line on a dirt path, so it wasn't in the shed, but we did see them destroy an MTLB, which is, of course, good to see, and it's great to know that the Ukrainians are still managing to knock out Russian equipment here and there. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of news, where you can actually see Ukrainian helicopters in action. Now, this is one of the most in-depth videos. We've seen a couple of these like this on the Russians, but this is about the most in-depth video I've actually seen of the Ukrainians operating these helicopters themselves, and it shows us the entire process from prepping the helicopter to actually using it. So here we can actually see some Ukrainian soldiers loading rockets into this pod. Now we can see them lifting off. We can see that they're mostly Mi-8s, and they have a lot of Ukrainian flags and roundels on them. We can now see the helicopter pilots flying low across the field. Also, notice the little iPad things they have right there. Those are pretty cool. I mean, like, you never think about these Mi-8s, which were designed in, like, the 70s or the 60s, that they would ever have modern technology implemented into them. But we can see here with the Ukrainians that they put iPads into them, which, of course, give GPS location, which is, of course, really nice. We now see the helicopter lifting up a little bit to get over that tree line. We can now see them flying over the wheat fields. And the wheat, just for y'all to know how long this war has been going on, the wheat's already looking ripe. It's already turning yellow. And so that's pretty wild to me to think that this war has been going on that long. But we can finally see the helicopter lift up and fire off its rockets that we saw them loading in the earlier part of the video. And now we can already see them diving back down to the ground to make sure that they don't get hit by Russian anti-air. It's really, really cool to see the perspective of these Ukrainian helicopter pilots and how they're operating throughout the war, because we always see the Russian perspective on this. This is one thing that the Russians brag about. I guess you could say a whole lot, is because they have Ka-52s, which are one of the most advanced and I guess you could say modern helicopters in the world, and so they love to show them off. But we never really see the Ukrainians operating theirs because they have an older fleet of Mi-24s, or in this example, an Mi-8. But we see them here using this Mi-8, and they're using them literally the exact same way as the Russian helicopters, which kind of lets us know that, at least in that perspective, the Ka-52 is no better than the Mi-8. Both of them can tilt up and fire off unguided rockets, and so while the Ka-52 on paper is much more capable than the Mi-8, due to what they're both having to do to survive during this war, the difference is really negligible. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can actually see an MTLB being destroyed again. This time, this MTLB was actually destroyed by a Javelin. First, we see the MTLB backing out of the tree line, and we can already see the Russian soldiers that are on top of the MTLB, and we can most likely assume, although this is an assumption, that there's probably Russian infantry inside the MTLB as well, and they're pretty much overpacking it. We can now see that MTLB driving down this dirt path, and then it gets hit. Suffice it to say, it looks like a large amount of the Russian crew, when we see the video here, did not survive, as most of them are just sitting on top of the MTLB. And it looks like they were, by and large, knocked out. It's good to see that an MTLB like that is knocked out, and while it's, of course, a little unfortunate to see, because I wanted, while, of course, they are invaders, do want to have a little bit of compassion for them, it is good to see that a large amount of Russian soldiers have been wiped out, because, of course, that's less, I guess you could say, power that they can field against the Ukrainians in that one specific area. So a very good shot by that anti-tank crew, and we're now moving on to see that a Ukrainian soldier is telling everyone that life in the infantry is rough. And I already knew that, but he's letting Ukrainians know, and also the rest of the world know in this video, that being an infantryman is pretty tough as a job. And so here's the video, and I'm just going to let it play. It does have a speech-to-text translation at the bottom of the screen, and so I'm just going to let y'all hear him talk.
Фу, блядь. Никогда не думал, что у пехоты такая сложная работа, блядь. Это жесть. Наступил, вперед прошел на 10 метров, блядь, копай блиндаж. Прошел на 20 метров вперед, копай блиндаж. Отступил на 20 метров, опять копай блиндаж. Ой, блядь, и это за день, блядь, может быть так 5 раз. То копаешь, то наступаешь. Наступил, опять копаешь, копаешь. Вообще класс. Подкачаться. Кто-то говорит, блядь, 100 штук. Да хуя платят, блядь, на передовой, блядь. Ладно. Блядь, копать надо. Прошли немножко вперед. Все. Вчерашний блиндаж не канает. Надо опять копать. Вот такие дела, ребята. Ничего. Одно радует, что идем вперед, а не назад. И согласен блиндажи копать. Каждый день новый блиндаж, если вперед идем. Всем удачи. Всем победы и мирного неба над головой.
An interesting video and an interesting perspective from him. We can hear him, of course, complaining about digging dugouts every single time they advance. Just a few yards, dig, a few more yards, dig. But that is crucially important, and that's something that I've always been wondering if the Ukrainians and the Russians are doing. We don't know about if the Russians are doing it, but we do know that the Ukrainians, according to that soldier in particular, are digging dugouts every single time they move, which is vitally important. If you ever hear recounts from World War II veterans, especially a lot of them that served in the Western European theater in France in 1944 and 1945, you'll hear that it's really common for them. As soon as they would stop moving, they would start digging. It didn't matter what kind of a dugout they were able to get, whether it was just a simple foxhole that was maybe 2 feet lower than the rest of the ground around them. Anything was better than nothing. The reason being is that if an artillery barrage came down on that infantry unit, these guys can run and duck into these foxholes, and unless if that artillery lands dead onto their foxhole, like dead inside of it, they're going to be okay. The shrapnel will travel over them instead of into them. And so that's why it's very important to dig during a war. And we can see that guy, of course, recognizing how important it is to dig, but still it's tiresome work to him. And he was also saying, you know, like a lot of people are complaining that the Ukrainian soldiers on the front don't need to be paid this. And he was like, I promise you, the amount I'm digging, it's worth it. And then we could also hear him go on to talk about more at length how he is more than happy to keep on digging as long as they're gaining ground and not losing it. And that was actually a really good thing to hear from him, considering we don't even know where he is on the front line, that wherever he is making some kind of an advance. And that's just wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are still pushing the Russians back wherever that guy is. So I wish him the best of luck. I hope he does incredibly well, and I hope that he doesn't have to dig all too much in the future. And if he does have to dig, they're covering a lot more ground than just a couple of yards. And with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can actually see an average bomb shelter in the countryside of Ukraine. And so, here is the video.
The cellar, sometimes known as the bomb shelter. Plenty of pickled goods. Lots of empty jars to fill up. And a ton of compote. That's boiled fruit in water with, I think, a bit of sugar. But as you can see, this beautiful subterranean apartment has no chair nor bed. So it would only rate 2-star. But it sure felt good this morning when there was heavy bombardment.
So you can see the guy who's commentating about this, I guess you could call it makeshift basement bunker, and how it's not exactly the best place to be, but something's better than nothing. And for a lot of these Ukrainians who are living during these artillery barrages in their villages, this basement is the best thing on earth. And of course, we saw him commentate on that at the end, and we can see that they have a small store of supplies. And one thing I would like to note, because this is something that a lot of people, I don't really think it crosses their minds much, but while Ukraine is trying to westernize, Ukraine, compared to normal Western countries, is incredibly poor. The average Ukrainian makes nearly nothing compared to, say, an American or a Briton or a German. They make almost nothing in actual, I guess you could say, wages or salary, and so they have to make do with what they have. And so as you can see that for the by and large, they've pretty much made like kompot. It looks like they have some kompot over there in jars. They don't have any bed down there, they don't have anything like that, but it doesn't matter as long as they're alive. And so it's great to see that this family, wherever this guy is in the shelter, has made, I guess you could say, precautions to make sure that they're well protected against artillery barrages, and that they are making sure that if bad comes to worse, they do have a place to stay, at least for a short while until the barrage ends. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can actually see a fix to the gas shortage. And this blew my mind because apparently there's a Ukrainian out there, or some kind of an engineer in that country, that's read a history book and actually knows about these, I guess you could say, wood gas furnaces, or I don't really know what you would want to call them. But just to give a little bit of history here before this guy talks about it, because he's about to explain how it works. There was a gas shortage in Germany during World War II. There wasn't a lot of petrol, and the Germans ran into that problem consistently throughout the war. And so they had to find a way to get around this. And they tried a couple of different things, and one of them was a system that turned wood into alcohol, which could then be burned. Wood alcohol engine. World War II. I'm going to see if we can find a picture of a Tiger that has this on it. There's a couple of pictures. We can see one there. We can also see looks like a Ford Model A with a hardtop that also has that on it. I'm trying to find the German Tigers that had that on it. But anyways, we're not going to worry about that all too much. You can see that this is a rather old system, and it actually works, surprisingly enough. It's not the most efficient system in the world, but if you're running low on something like petrol or gasoline, this is what will keep a car running. And we can now see that while this gas shortage is starting to strangle Ukraine a little bit in terms of their availability of gas, some Ukrainians are starting to pretty much pick up on this old tried and true system, and they're now starting to use wood gas. I see a lot of people saying that's wood gas. Thank y'all very much for correcting me. Didn't know the exact name. And now that we know that, let's type in wood gas Tiger. And let me see if I can get a picture. Here we go. Here's the test Tiger that they tried this system on. You can see back there the wood gas being made, and you can see them actually moving this tank around on some kind of a training course over inclines and back down them. And so you can see that it did work, but I believe that the Germans ditched this project because it was considered inefficient, cost inefficient, and trying to upgrade all of their tanks to be able to work off of this would be pretty difficult, if not impossible. So we can see that it was used before, and we can now see Ukrainians stepping up and doing this now. And so, without further ado, here's the video.
Сумы, центральный рынок, машина на дровах. Вот тебе дожилось. Оце установка, кидаєш дрова, і вона едет. Надо уже переходить полностью на дрова. Крутяк. Надо себе такое.
And so with that, we can see that this car has been updated to work on that wood gas kind of system. And it's really interesting to see, and I hope that the Ukrainians may be able to implement that a little bit more to take the strain off of, I guess you could say, their limited gas and oil supplies at the moment. They are starting to run out, and it seems like it's been incredibly difficult, if not possible, to actually try and replenish, I guess you could say, their storage. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can actually see an old lady, an old Ukrainian babushka, providing hospitality to some foreigners who are in the country. I don't know if they're a part of the Foreign Legion, but we can see that she pulled out the full 9 yards and cooked them up a meal that is almost like Thanksgiving here in the United States. And so I'm going to let the video play and just let y'all see it.
Что это?
Сметана.
Сметана и сахар,
Да.
блины.
И блин.
Это блины или что?
Блин.
Блины, сахар и сметана.
Да.
Красиво.
Вот така красива блін. Якщо хто любить сладкий, я сахар можу ще більше насипати.
Да.
Тому що сметана не дуже сладка. Ну як? Сметана є сметана.
Очень вкусно.
Я ще можу какао сюди додати. Ну і все. Мене таке. Мене фантазії дуже великі.
Happy киска.
We can see the cat sitting there right beside him.
Хоче хтось, додавайте собі.
Everything homemade.
And that's the end of the video. But what a feast! This is something that we would pull out in my family for Thanksgiving. But this old lady has cooked up this guy a meal to remember, and also the cat sitting right beside him, really politely, probably waiting to eat too. And so, what a sweet video, and it does show like the hospitality and the niceness of Ukrainians that are actually just there and, you know, just living their normal lives. And you can see how nice and generous they actually are. These are the people that we're supporting, and these are the people that Ukraine is fighting to defend. And so when you think about it in that perspective, you can see 100% why they're actually fighting and what they're fighting for. And they're fighting for wonderful old ladies like her. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of news, where we can see the Ukrainians recovering a Russian tank. This is something that we rarely ever see, is the Ukrainians actually in the process of dragging one of these tanks to, I guess you could say, the rear line, so that way they can get them ready for their own service. But here we can see a Ukrainian recovery vehicle pulling a Russian tank out of this tree line. The recovery vehicle's pulling the tank out. It looks like it's most likely based on a T-72, and you can see that it has a T-72B3 in tow. Do y'all notice that? I just noticed something on this that might be something important to note. What's that? That's a red square. And who uses red squares? The Belarusians use red squares. And this was in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are retrieving this tank. No other identifying markers used by the Russians use this red square on the vehicle. The only time we've seen this is when Belarusian forces are moving to the border, is when we see that red square. We also see a Z painted onto it, but this may suggest that there is a small contingent of Belarusians that are within Ukraine and actually fighting for the Russians. So, kind of a bizarre thing. We never had any information to suggest that the Belarusians have actually gone into Ukraine and fought for them. but this is one of the best indicators that there's at least a small force of Belarusians that are fighting alongside the Russians. We don't know where this footage was taken to be able to say where they are, but apparently they are in Ukraine. We just don't know how many. With that, we're now going to let the video continue on. And that's the end of the video, but once again, a bit of a disturbing sight to see that there's apparently a couple of Belarusian tanks that are serving in pretty much under Russian command inside of Ukraine. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can then see the Ukrainians capturing more tanks today. They've had a really good day in terms of their captures and what they've been able to get. We're going to have to mute the video. Of course, it has copyrighted music in it. But we can see that they captured a T-72B, one of Russia's older main battle tanks. They also managed to capture a TOS-1. And then it looks like they also managed to capture another T-72B near the back. And so they captured two main battle tanks in running condition and also a thermobaric MLRS in running condition as well. The odds of doing something like that are incredibly low, especially at this point in the war, but they've managed to pull off, I would say, a miracle in capturing this many vehicles. So, of course, great to see. It's wonderful to know that the Ukrainians still have the ability to overrun Russian forces to the point they abandon vehicles in such this number and such this kind. Usually we only see APCs being abandoned at this point, but now we're seeing main battle tanks once again falling victim to Ukrainian capture. And so great to see, and now we can see the camera pan back forward, and that's the end of the video, and we can see that the Ukrainians still have a little bit of extra firepower in them, I guess you could say, to be able to take these Russian vehicles intact. We're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see some Ukrainians in good spirits. I actually did get a translation for this, and so I'll tell y'all before we start. So this guy's going to walk up to him, assuming his girlfriend or his wife, and say, "Hey, how do you like the panoramic ceiling?" And she's going to look up and say, "Oh, it's great, but it gets a little hot at times." And so now that y'all have got that, I'm just going to let y'all see the video, and just remember that's what the guy and girl say.
Вика, ну как тебе бутылочки мыть с панорамным видом?
The roof is gone. The roof is gone in their house. They're still living in it, and they're going to joke about the situation. The Ukrainians, not just the soldiers, but the people themselves, are a very special kind, and I gotta say, I got nothing but admiration for them and how they can just go on with things like this happening to them, with the entire roof of their house just being carried away by God knows what's happened to it. And they'll just still sit there and live in it and even joke about the situation and not take it too seriously, and they don't let them... I guess you could say they don't really let it bring them down. They just keep on going. And I gotta say, when you really think about that, that's incredibly admirable, because if the roof came off on my house, I don't know if I'd be able to joke about that, because that'd be a bit of a big deal for me. But with that, pretty cool to see, and it's great to know that Ukrainian civilians are still in high morale, and they aren't getting down because the war is going on for so long. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see the correct way to make the Z symbol. I just want y'all to know this, because I've seen a lot of y'all actually putting Z's on the vehicles like this. And just for everyone who's watching the stream that does mark vehicles with Z's, I want you to try and get a piece of scrap metal off of the burned husk of the vehicle you just painted the white Z on, and then just bend a little bit of the hot metal to make a Z as well. So I think it's a much more efficient way. And all jokes aside, this is actually something funny to me that the Ukrainians did, is that they're walking up on Russian vehicles and just playing around with the scrap metal, and then, you know, taking pictures and uploading them to the world to make fun of the Russians, pretty much. We can also see that this tank appears to have taken a massive hit to the rear section of it. We can see that the entire side of the hull has disappeared. We can also see one of the road wheels just here sitting in the field on the side. And we can see that you can actually just look straight into the tank from the left side. So whatever hit that tank blew the whole entire thing apart. It may have been an ammo detonation, considering that the turret is missing, that blew out the side and also left the turret to just go flying off into who knows where, because we don't even see it. So with that, pretty cool to see. And it's great to see that the Ukrainian soldiers are still joking around. That's one thing that a lot of people aren't getting. Well, not really getting, but I don't think a lot of people may understand, is that joking around even during difficult times keeps people sane. And so that's why I highly support Ukrainian soldiers joking around and laughing even if the situation is very bad or very grim. Any kind of humor, regardless of what kind, keeps their spirits up incredibly high, and that's also why I do make some jokes as well here on this channel, because this is some grim stuff for me to look at 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, and so I also make jokes as well to try and keep it light and not let it get to me. But with that, I hope a lot of y'all also keep that in mind as well, because while it's important to keep an eye on this war, I hope that a lot of y'all aren't getting too stressed out over it, because it's always good to keep up good spirits, or else this will really get to you. But of course, great to see, and we're going to move on to our last bit of location unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian BTR-4 firing into the distance. The Ukrainians have a decent amount of these BTR-4s, but we never actually see them in operation. But today, that was different. We actually got to see one on the front lines of firing at the Russians in the distance. And so here's the video. Unfortunately, I can't play the audio, but we can see here the BTR-4 using its 30mm autocannon inside of its turret to fire at the Russians, and we can also see that it backed into its position, which is really interesting to me as well. Hopefully the camera will pan a little bit more to the left so I can show that. And so there we go. You can now see the front of the BTR-4, and it backed up to this bush, and then they turned the turret almost 180 degrees and started firing in that direction. I believe that was so the shoot and scoot would be incredibly effective. If you're already facing the direction you're about to be heading in, obviously it's going to be a lot quicker than pulling like a 3-point turn or a 2-point turn and then leaving. So I think they did that so that way they could fire the 30mm as fast as possible, and then just scoot as quickly as they can, so that way a Russian ATGM crew, if they're out there, can't hit that BTR and destroy it. We can see that the BTR-4 is still firing, and now the video is looping. But really interesting to see, we never really see a lot of these BTR-4s in operation, but in this video we finally did. And of course we can't see the end result of its work, but based off of how much it was firing, I have to assume that it did some kind of work on the Russian forces in some degree. With that, we're now going to move on to the well, actually, we're going to not move on to the next bit of location unknown news. We've run out. And so we're going to start moving towards the Poltava area, but of course we're going to take a quick pause to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we'll move on to the Poltava, Kharkiv, and northern Donbass news. Hello?
Okay, and it's question time?
Yep, it's question time.
All right, so first up, we have a $100 donation from DC Williams, who says, a one-day viewer, participant, or whatever you wish to term me. However, quickly advancing into my 8th decade, I fairly well can distinguish quality from BS. You are the former.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. That kind of support helps our channel to keep going. And one-day viewer, do you think he means that he's only been on here like yesterday or today, Matthew?
I believe he means he's been around since day one.
Well, if you've been around since day one, congratulations, you were one of the few, because there was hardly anyone who was watching this on day one, and so that's really cool to hear that you've been around for that long. But of course, I thank you so much for the support. It helps out our channel a massive deal, and as people's attention, of course, wanes from the Ukraine war, it's always good to know that there are a lot of people out there who greatly appreciate what we do and want us to keep on doing it, and are giving us the ability to do that. And so I thank you so much once again for the kind words as well, because that means a lot to us, that a lot of people think we are quality. I try my best to be quality, and while the titles, everyone always gives a dink against the titles, they are a little clickbaity, I will admit that. But there's always a level of truth in them, and so I always just suggest that if anyone finds the titles clickbaity, just stick around, because I will get to the part of the news that made that title what it is. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, DC Williams. That helps us out a great deal, and I thank you so much for appreciating the quality that we try and put into this. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $50 donation from Khan Azor, a longtime channel viewer, who says, here's some funds for you guys to get your own DJI drop kit that you can buy on Amazon. I got one for my Mavic 2. It's awesome. Use it to drop water balloons on my nephews.
Well, that's pretty cool and kind of a little morbid in a way, but that's actually neat to hear. And I also thank you for giving us a decent amount of support. It helps out our channel a great deal. I've already went through that spill to DC Williams, but it helps us out and it keeps us running. And I got to thank you so much for the support. And I think we might try and look into one of those if we can. But once again, thank you so much, Conazor, for the support. It means a lot, and it helps us to keep on doing the news and keep this thing running. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Kaltenberg, who's another longtime channel viewer, who says, Slava Ukraine.
And Slava Ukraine, Kaltenberg, and thank you so much for the support. I got to thank you all once again, because without everyone's support, our channel can't keep going. And it's just it's great to know that a lot of people out there do enjoy it to the point that they want to ensure that I can keep doing this. So it's greatly appreciated once again, and I can't thank you all enough for the support to me and also the support y'all give to Ukraine on the Sunday fundraisers, because honestly it's unbelievable to think that this channel's been able to march on this long with the war 8 days away from being in its at the end of its 4th month and entering its 5th, and we're still here reporting the news, and we've still got a massive viewership that sits here and watches the news every night. And so I thank you all once again, and with that, that is the end of this question segment. If you have sent in a live chat, a super chat, do not worry. We will answer all of those by the end of the night. And if you have sent in a live chat question, we will answer a decent amount of those near the end of the stream. And so with that, we have now reached the end of this question segment, and we're going to move on to the Poltava, Kharkiv, and northern Donbass news. Starting off in Poltava, we've actually seen some Ukrainian soldiers get married. We can see here that they managed to put together this wedding in a few hours, and we can see the picture here of the bride and groom stepping out of the church after they got married. It was apparently organized, of course, ad hoc, but it looks like they're having a pretty good time, and hopefully they'll be able to make it through this war perfectly fine and have a story to tell their children about how they got married, which will definitely be a story for the books. With that, we're now going to move out of the Poltava area, and we're now going to move towards Kharkiv. We've actually heard of some action near the Kharkiv salient today. For one of the first times ever, we've seen that the Ukrainians are actually firing a decent amount of artillery into the pocket, and we've seen a limited amount of infantry activity, which may be suggesting that the Ukrainians are once again trying to push the Russians out of this little salient, I guess you could say. So here in this first clip, we can actually see Ukrainians targeting an electronic warfare system with precise artillery rounds right on this rooftop. It sounds like it does have copyrighted music in it. I'll check again. It does. But you can see the electronic warfare antenna right here, and you can also see that the Russians raised the flag of the Russian Federation here near this building. And the Ukrainians have, of course, taken great offense to this, and they're going to try and destroy this electronic warfare antenna with the artillery. You can see the first round come in, and it hit nearly dead on to the antenna, but it was just a little bit off to the right. We can now see that the drone is still surveying the roof. We can see the antenna slightly right here where my mouse cursor is, and it's still standing. But of course, the Ukrainians are going to keep trying until they hit that actual antenna and knock it out. We don't see any Russian vehicles here, which is interesting to me. We can see a checkpoint. We don't see any soldiers at it. They may be hiding and in cover, considering that artillery is coming in. And we don't see any vehicles either, so I don't know what's up with this. But we do know that they had set up an antenna, and it was operational on top of this building. With that, that's the end of the video, and it looks like the artillery got pretty close, but we never saw it hit dead on. And so I'm not sure if that actual antenna was destroyed or not, but we can see that the Ukrainians did get pretty close and may have damaged it enough that it may have been knocked out of action. Moving on to the next bit of the news from this area near Potomac, we can actually see the Ukrainian artillery firing into the pocket. I don't know if the last video and this one are kind of tied together, but we can see here that the Ukrainians are continuing to fire into the pocket with the artillery, and they're trying to put pressure on the Russian communications and logistics networks, and maybe even the infantry themselves, to try and push them back eventually, or just stir them up. But anyways, here's the video. We can now see the second piece firing. We We now see the piece firing again, and you can see that they're reloading them incredibly quickly. These are Soviet systems, and they're of a smaller caliber, and so it is easier and faster to reload this kind of piece, just because the weight of the ammo you're dealing with is lighter. Now you see some drone footage of where these artillery shells are landing. And the drone's just taking a look right now. It looks like we're still waiting for the shells to come in. Although it does look like an explosion has occurred already here on the right side of the screen. Now you can see the smoke billowing up even further. I think it may have hit some kind of ammunition that's burning due to that smoke. And we now see another round coming in. It looks like there's 2 funnels there in the middle of the screen, but I can't really tell you if that's exactly correct. But we can see large billows of smoke coming up from the artillery shells that are hitting around this area in Kharkiv. Unfortunately, we can't really see the Russian forces in this video, but hopefully the Ukrainians are hitting them dead on. With that, that is the end of the video, and it's very interesting to see that the Ukrainians are once again exerting a sizable amount of pressure based on video evidence today on this Kharkiv pocket. Finally, we can actually see the Foreign Legion in this area using a javelin against a Russian vehicle in the distance, which does show us that